Somewhere in Wisconsin, a man goes to work every morning. He clocks in, he does his job, he eats his lunch, and at some point during the day, at some point that nobody around him finds unusual, he opens his toolbox. Clipped to the inside of the lid, there is a photograph of a girl. He has kept it there for years. On the morning of July 17, 1990, an 18-year-old girl named Berit Beck left her family's home in Sturtevant, Wisconsin, and pointed her father's van north toward a future she had just begun to plan. She had graduated from high school only weeks before. She played violin. She was deciding still what kind of woman she wanted to become. And she had the particular, unhurried confidence of someone who believed she had all the time in the world to figure it out. She never arrived where she was going. Her van was found 2 days later, abandoned in a parking lot in Fond du Lac, 70 miles from home. Her body was found 5 weeks after that, in a ditch off a rural county road, so far gone that she could only be identified by her dental records. The case went cold almost immediately, and it would stay cold for 24 years, while the evidence that could have broken it open sat quietly in a crime lab, waiting for someone to ask the right question.
This is the story of a case that should not have taken 24 years to solve. Not because the evidence was hidden, it wasn't. Not because the investigators failed, they didn't. But because in 1990, the technology to read what the evidence was saying did not yet exist at the scale it needed to. And so the answers sat there, patient and silent, inside a Wisconsin crime lab, while Berit Beck's family buried their daughter, marked her birthdays, and waited. What cracked this case open was not a confession. It was not a witness who finally came forward after decades of silence. It was not a deathbed revelation or a tip called in from a payphone. It was a fingerprint, 9 of them in fact, lifted from ordinary objects inside Barrett's van on the very day investigators first processed the crime scene in the summer of 1990. The prints were real. The prints were there, and for 24 years, nobody knew whose hands had left them.
Berit Lynn Beck was born on April 13, 1972, in Sturtevant, Wisconsin, a small village in Racine County, the kind of place where everybody at the gas station knows your name, where high school sports scores run in the local paper, and where the distance between a front porch and a neighbor's front porch feels, in the best possible way, like no distance at all. She grew up in a house with her parents, Dave and Diane, and a younger brother named Ben. By every account, from family, from classmates, from the teachers who watched her come through Case High School, Barrett was the kind of person a room quietly organized itself around. Not loud, not the center of attention in any theatrical sense, but present. Genuinely, warmly present in a way that people noticed without quite being able to explain why. She played violin in the school orchestra, and this detail matters, not because it is decorative, not because it adds color to a profile that would otherwise feel incomplete, but because music, for Barrett, was not a hobby. It was the language she was most fluent in. Her mother, Diane, would later say that whatever direction her daughter's life took, she always knew music would be part of it. That was simply a given, a fact as settled as her name. In the spring of 1990, Barrett graduated from Case High School. She was 18 years old. Ahead of her, college applications, a future she had not yet fully drawn, a life that was still in the pleasant, wide-open state of becoming. She had taken a clerical job at J.I. Case headquarters to earn money through the summer, practical, responsible, the kind of decision that says something about a person's character without them having to announce it. The job had arranged for her to attend a 4-day computer training seminar in Appleton, roughly 100 miles to the north. It was the sort of errand that, in the summer of 1990, would have felt entirely unremarkable. A drive up the highway, a few days of training, home by the weekend. On the morning of July 17, 1990, Barrett said goodbye to her father at the door. Dave Beck would remember that moment for the rest of his life, not because anything about it seemed significant at the time, but because of what she said as she was leaving. She could see the worry on his face,
the ordinary parental reflex of a father watching his daughter drive off alone into unfamiliar territory. And so she smiled at him, the way 18-year-olds smile at the anxieties of the people who love them. And she said, "Don't worry, Dad. All the people up north are good people." Those were the last words Dave Beck ever heard from his daughter. She left in the family's gray two-tone GMC van. She had a route. She had a plan. She had, by all accounts, every reason in the world to believe that July 17, 1990 would be the kind of day you forget about almost as soon as it ends. What we know about Berit Beck's journey on that morning is partial, reconstructed years later from receipts and witnesses and the particular silence of roads that don't remember who drove them. But investigators were eventually able to establish one thing with certainty. At some point during that drive north, Barrett stopped at a Walgreens in Fond du Lac. She purchased a Jolene bleach kit, the kind of small, ordinary errand you fold into a longer trip without thinking twice about it. She paid. She left. That stop at the Walgreens in Fond du Lac was the last confirmed sighting of Berit Beck alive. And what she bought that day, that small, forgettable purchase, would become, 24 years later, one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case.
On July 19, 1990, 2 days after Berit Beck left her father at the door, a gray two-tone GMC van was found sitting in the parking lot of a Kmart store in Fond du Lac. It had not been there long enough for anyone to notice it immediately, but it had been there long enough to matter. When investigators arrived and looked inside, what they found told them, without any ambiguity, that something had gone profoundly wrong. The van had been abandoned, but it had not been abandoned empty. Inside, investigators found Barrett's belongings, her employee manual from her job at J.I. Case, personal items, the Jolene bleach kit she had purchased at the Walgreens earlier that day. There was evidence of cigarettes in the van, which Barrett's family confirmed immediately. She did not smoke, not ever. Someone else had been in that vehicle, someone who left things behind without realizing what they were leaving. And then investigators found something else. Tied around Barrett's abandoned possessions, bound in a way that spoke not of carelessness, but of deliberateness, of someone who had planned, was a blindfold. It appeared to have been torn from a red T-shirt. The same red T-shirt, investigators would later determine, lay ripped on the floor of the van itself. The blindfold would become one of the most haunting details in the entire case, not because of what it proved in a courtroom, that argument would come much later, but because of what it told investigators in that parking lot in the summer of 1990 about the nature of what had happened to Barrett. This was not a random act of chaos. This was controlled, premeditated. Someone had come prepared. A massive search effort was launched in the days that followed Barrett's disappearance. Her face was printed on flyers that went up across Racine County and beyond. Her photograph appeared on the side of a semi-trailer. Hundreds of volunteers and investigators combed Fond du Lac County for any trace of her. For 5 weeks, the Beck family lived inside the particular suffocating hell of not knowing, which is its own kind of cruelty, distinct from grief, because grief at least knows what it is mourning.
On August 22, 1990, a farmer making his way along a rural road approximately 5 miles west of Waupun discovered human remains in a roadside ditch. The remains were skeletal. The decomposition was so advanced, 5 weeks of a Wisconsin summer having done its work, that Berit Lynn Beck could only be identified by her dental records. She was 18 years old. She had been dead, investigators estimated, since shortly after she disappeared. The cause of death, when it could be determined, was strangulation. Barrett had been killed deliberately, methodically, by someone who had controlled every moment of what happened to her from the time she was taken until the time she was left in that ditch.
The sheriff who responded to the scene, a young detective named Mylan Fink, would carry this case with him for the next 25 years. The evidence collected from the van in the summer of 1990 was significant. Fingerprints, multiple, clear, recoverable, were lifted from the Burger King cup, the employee manual, the Jolin bleach kit, and several other surfaces inside the vehicle. Investigators documented them, processed them, submitted them to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. All of this happened in 1990, in the weeks immediately following Barrett's disappearance, with the diligence and professionalism that the case demanded. And then the investigation ran into a wall that no amount of diligence could dismantle, because the wall was not incompetence, it was not negligence, it was time, it was technology. It was the simple, brutal fact that in 1990, the fingerprint database systems available to Wisconsin investigators were not yet capable of matching an unknown print against the population of candidates that the evidence required. The prints went into the lab held them. The case, without a name to attach to that evidence, went cold. And the person who had left those prints, 9 of them, across multiple objects in the van of a girl he had taken and killed, went home, went to work, opened his toolbox every morning, and kept on living.
For 24 years, the Berit Beck case existed in a particular kind of limbo, not forgotten, not abandoned, but suspended. The Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Office never formally closed the file. The evidence remained preserved, the fingerprints remained in the crime lab, and the investigators who had worked the original case in 1990, including the young detective Mylan Fink, who had since risen to become the county sheriff, carried it with them the way investigators carry the cases they couldn't solve, quietly, persistently, and with the particular weight of a debt they felt they owed to a family that had never stopped waiting. There were no dramatic reinvestigation moments in the years between 1990 and 2014. No new witnesses emerged, no deathbed confessions, no envelope slipped under a door. The case simply waited, the way cold cases wait, in the space between what is known and what can be proven, for the world to catch up to its evidence. In 2013, investigators made a decision that would change everything. They submitted the original fingerprint evidence, the prints lifted from the Burger King cup, the employee manual, the Jolin bleach kit, and the other surfaces inside Barrett's van for retesting. Not because new evidence had emerged, but because the technology available to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab in 2013 was categorically different from what had existed in 1990. The databases were larger, the matching algorithms were more precise. The question that the 1990 investigation had been unable to answer, whose fingerprints are these, was now, finally, a question the lab could actually attempt to answer. On February 27, 2014, the Wisconsin State Crime Lab returned its findings. 5 of the unidentified fingerprints recovered from inside Berit Beck's van, from the Burger King cup, the employee manual, the Jolin bleach kit, and the other surfaces inside Barrett's van, had been matched. Not to a theory, not to a person of interest developed through witness accounts or circumstantial leads, to a name, a specific, living, identifiable human being whose fingerprints existed in the database because he had a prior criminal record. That name was Dennis J. Brantner. Dennis Brantner was 60 years old in 2014. He lived in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He worked as a truck driver, a profession that had kept him moving across the state for decades, anonymous, unremarkable, a face at a truck stop that nobody looked at twice. At the time of Berit Beck's disappearance in July of 1990, Brantner had been living in Fond du Lac. He had driven those roads, he had known that geography, and he had left 9 fingerprints across multiple objects on multiple surfaces inside the van of an 18-year-old girl he had never, by any legitimate account, had any reason to be near. Berit Beck and Dennis Brantner did not know each other. They had no shared history, no mutual connections, No reason, not one reason that any investigator, prosecutor, or person applying ordinary logic could identify for his fingerprints to exist inside her vehicle. The Wisconsin State Crime Lab had not found a coincidence. They had found the answer to a question that a family had been living inside for 24 years. Investigators moved carefully. Additional testing was conducted the following month, and 4 more fingerprint matches were returned. Prints found under the front passenger seat, on the inside of the middle door window, and on a cellophane cigarette wrapper. 9 fingerprints in total. 9 separate moments in which Dennis Brandner had touched something inside a van that did not belong to him, in a vehicle belonging to a girl he claimed not to know. In April of 2014, investigators spoke with Brandner's co-workers at the trucking company where he worked. What those co-workers told them stopped investigators cold, not because it was complicated, but because it was so simple and so disturbing that it took a moment to fully absorb what they were hearing. Inside Dennis Brandner's toolbox at work, clipped to the underside of the lid in a place where he would see it every time he opened it, there was a photograph. His co-workers had seen it for years. Some had asked him about it, and every time they asked, Brandner had the same answer, delivered without hesitation, without apparent discomfort, with the casual ease of a man who had long since settled into his own version of events. He told them she was a girlfriend of his. The photograph was of Berit Beck. For somewhere in the vicinity of 24 years, Dennis Brandner had gone to work every morning, opened his toolbox, and looked at the face of the 18-year-old girl he had taken from a Wisconsin highway and left in a ditch, and he had told anyone who noticed, anyone who asked, that she was someone who had loved him.
On March 27, 2015, nearly 25 years to the month after Berit Beck left her father at the door, detectives from the Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Office arrested Dennis J. Brandner in Kenosha on a warrant for first-degree intentional homicide. He was 61 years old. He was transported to the Fond du Lac County Jail, processed, and booked. During the booking process, investigators discovered 37 oxycodone pills concealed in his left boot, pills he had not disclosed, pills he had no prescription for, pills that added a separate criminal charge to the one that would define the rest of his life. When investigators sat across from Brandner and confronted him with the fingerprint evidence, 9 prints, 9 separate surfaces, 9 moments of contact inside a van belonging to a girl he claimed not to know, his response was not what one might expect from an innocent man. He became emotional. He said, according to the criminal complaint, "I swear I did not kill her. I didn't kill her because I'm not that way." And then, when pressed about the evidence connecting him to Barrett's van, about how his fingerprints came to exist on her belongings inside her vehicle, he said something that has no innocent explanation. He said, "I don't remember how I got in the van." Not, "I was never in the van." Not, "Those cannot be my prints, there must be an error." Not, "I demand to know how this is possible." He said he could not remember how he got inside, which means, on some level, he was unwilling to examine in that room he knew that he had. The criminal complaint released following his arrest contained one further detail that the Beck family, the investigators, and anyone who has followed this case since have never been able to set aside. Among the items sought in the search warrant executed at Brandner's Kenosha home were things that had gone missing from Berit Beck's van or her body on the day she was taken: a gold band ring, a pearl-faced gold watch, a keychain engraved with the passage "Footsteps in the Sand," her keys. None of those items were recovered. Whatever Brandner had taken from Berit Beck beyond her life, he had ensured that it could not be found. In March of 2015, Fond du Lac County District Attorney Eric Toney charged Brandner with first-degree intentional homicide. Sheriff Mylan Fink, the same young detective who had stood at that ditch in August of 1990 and looked at what remained of an 18-year-old girl, stood at a press conference and described what had happened to Barrett as a bold stranger abduction. A targeted, deliberate act carried out by a man who had chosen her, followed her, and controlled every moment of what came after. Dennis Brantner went to trial in the summer of 2016 on the charge of first-degree intentional homicide. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution built its case on the fingerprint evidence: 9 prints, 3 confirmed objects, a man with no legitimate reason to have ever been inside that van. The defense argued that fingerprint evidence alone was circumstantial, that prints could show presence but not intent, that the state had not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Dennis Brantner had killed Berit Beck. The jury deliberated, and then the jury deadlocked. One juror, a single holdout, refused to vote for conviction. The judge declared a mistrial. The Beck family, who had waited 26 years for this moment, sat in that courtroom and watched the proceeding collapse without a verdict. The district attorney announced he would retry Brantner. A second trial was scheduled for February of 2018, but before that trial could begin, Brantner's attorneys reached an agreement with the prosecution. Brantner would enter what is known as an Alford plea, a legal mechanism in which a defendant does not admit guilt but acknowledges that the evidence presented is sufficient for a judge or jury to find them guilty. He pleaded to a reduced charge, second-degree reckless homicide. In exchange, Dennis Brantner received a sentence of 10 years in prison. 10 years, the maximum allowed under that charge. His sentence was to begin after he finished serving 6.5 years for the drug charges stemming from the oxycodone found in his boot at the time of his arrest. He did not admit to killing Berit Beck. He has never admitted to killing Berit Beck.
In a Fond du Lac County courtroom on March 1, 2018, the Beck family stood and spoke. Berit's father, Dave Beck, the man who had watched his daughter drive away from the front door 27 years earlier, who had said goodbye without knowing it was a goodbye, told the court, "After 27 years, there is no preparation you can make for this day. Lots of thought, lots of anger." Berit's mother, Diane, said she was thankful for the 18 years she had been given with her daughter, and that she often found herself thinking about what Berit would have become: a wife, a mother, probably a musician. Her brother Ben, who had grown up in the shadow of his sister's absence, who had never known what it meant to have a sibling who simply existed, unremarkably, in the next room, said, "Would she have children? Would I have been an uncle?" All these questions will forever be unanswered because of one evil man. The district attorney, Eric Toney, addressed the courtroom and said it was a nameless, faceless person until 2014, when the Wisconsin Crime Lab identified fingerprints, 9 of them in Berit's van. He paused, and then he said, "There is no amount of prison time or punishment that can bring Berit back or take away the anguish this family experiences." He was right, and that is the part of this case that sits with you long after the facts are finished. Not the fingerprints, not the database, not the legal proceedings that stretched across 3 decades. What stays is the knowledge that the answer was always there, that from the very first day the evidence existed that could have named the man who did this, and that for 24 years, while a family marked the anniversary of their daughter's death by driving to a cemetery in Mount Pleasant, that evidence waited, patient, silent, certain for the world to be ready to read it. Berit Lynn Beck was 18 years old. She played violin. She told her father not to worry about the people up north. She bought a bleach kit at a Walgreens on a Tuesday morning in July, and she never made it home. A scholarship in her name has been awarded every year since her death to students from Case High School who plan to study music in college. Her family goes to her grave every July 17th. She has never been forgotten, not for a single day. Dennis Brantner received 10 years. The Beck family waited 28. He has never admitted to what he did. The evidence said everything, and a courtroom still could not agree on what it meant. I want to know what you think. Leave it in the comments. Was that justice for Berit Beck?